Well, welcome everyone. My name's David Howard. I'm the co-director of the Global Centre on Healthcare and Urbanisation here at Kellogg College, known as a GCHU. It's a brand new academic year of public seminars, and it's always good to shake things up. So we're going to turn things around, and we're going to start the seminar with thanks. So I'd like to thank our administrator, Jessie Medina Weavers, who's been organising all this for forever, I think. And Jessie will be moving on to a new job where I think you're running the Medical Sciences Centre or Medical Sciences Division. So it's a downsizing role, Jessie. But I just, on behalf of, I think, everyone here, thank you for all you've done with our great Kellogg colleagues, such as Sarah. But thanks for making the centre such a success. And good luck with that tiny little Medical Sciences Division somewhere up a hill. But anyway, thank you so much, Jessie. And I will continue to say thank you for the King's Foundation for funding another year of seminars here. The university has worked with the King's Foundation for over 15 years, started with a Masters in Sustainable Urban Development, and the DPhil in Sustainable Urban Development, and a new series of sort of accessible online courses that are emerging as we speak. So the seminar series happens every, weeks 1 and weeks 8. Given this is a public seminar, might mean nothing to most people, but essentially it's the start of end of each academic term. So this one is the start of an academic term, and December the 3rd will be the next seminar, and then we have seminars in the start of January roundabouts, and then about March, and then 2 seminars in the glorious Oxford summer in May and end of June. So the point of the seminars is really bring people together, and we are really keen that the stars of the show are sent to the audience. Apologies to the speakers, but they were set up about 6, 7 years, even 8 years ago. And the idea was to ask a pithy question, have 4 provocative answers from our speakers, and then over to public and audience Q&A. So that sort of works so far. And it's great now over this coming year in particular, working closely with the King's Foundation and a new research programme at Highgrove House and Garden, where they're setting up a research centre looking specifically at the links between nature, wellbeing and health. So it's a great pleasure to have with us tonight Dr. Wilf Middleton, a research fellow at the King's Foundation, who will be guiding us, will be our pilot for the night, be chairing us through the discussion. We'll be asking a question, does designing and building with nature improve our health and well-being? And we've worked with Wilf for several years now. And in the summer, the GCHU, with the King's Foundation, the European Cultural Academy, run a summer school. And Dr. Matthew Hardy is in the audience as a co-organiser. And it's during the Venice Biennale. And Wilf's research looks at building with nature. How do you actually incorporate nature into the physical structure of the built environment? And as Matthew and I were wandering through the Venice Biennale, we saw Wilf's part of your research being displayed. So it's the first time I've seen a colleague and a friend on the stage, if you will, at Venice Biennale. So Wilf, over to you. It's your evening and the speaker's evening. So thank you.
Thanks, David. Great. I didn't even ask him to say that. That was very nice. Yes, it's a great pleasure to be here, and a warm welcome to everyone. As David said, my research kind of focuses on designed and vernacular architecture that integrates trees. And kind of driving this field has been a recent takeoff in the recognition of the many benefits of integrating nature into the built environment. And you kind of might understandably feel like it's a strange position we find ourselves in, that we need to let nature in to the built environment. Like, how did we let it go in the first place? And I sort of have this idea that it's because nature is essentially quite complicated and unpredictable, and that our designs try to be the opposite of this a lot of the time. So very planned and well-defined and within certain boundaries. And there's the separation of landscape architecture from architecture is kind of testament to this. It's delineating between the kind of controllable blueprint of a building and the chaos of living things that aren't marked out by 4 corners or change from season to season or from year to year. And the built environment is it's awash with solutions to this, to certain aspects of this separation, right? To getting rid of nature from design. So air conditioning units and air filters, and visually interesting skylines are all doing like a lot of work in our towns and cities. And there are certainly some handy upshots to all of this, upshots, sorry. So, we don't have to clean leaves out of gutters, and roots don't crack the pavements. And when the mayor cuts the ribbon on a development, it can be presented in all its splendor at any time of year. But of course, the organic world has many kind of impacts that aren't always visible on schematics or on the balance sheet. It's not the same to sit under a air conditioning unit as a shade tree. And we might enjoy seeing our environment grow old with us, or be surprised by the week in April when everything springs to life. Just for me, it's been a really pleasant surprise that this year's been a bumper year for apples on the footpath by my flat. Kind of unpredictable things that you can't, you wouldn't expect. So the question here is sort of, do practitioners need to talk about these specific things, or are there generalized things that we can say about the relationship between nature and health and well-being? Like, what is it we like about leafy streets? Is it the mix of colors, or is it about breaking up right angles? Do we like this unplanned aspect of it? And can we quantify these effects? And if we know the reasons, can architects and landscape architects make good arguments for the benefits of nature? Can data help us make a convincing case for the health benefits, either in a heating climate, or in a polluted street, or in a school setting? And what if architects and planners and developers at large know about these benefits? What can we do then? So I'm delighted to welcome 4 speakers who are going to answer all of those questions and any that you have as well. And so first we'll hear from Cleo Valentine, who is a doctoral researcher in architectural neuroimmunology at Cambridge University, examining how built environments influence neurophysiological stress, inflammation, and long-term health. She's also senior researcher and senior research and innovation lead at the Research Institute of Sweden, and senior design researcher in neuroarchitecture at HKS. And at Cambridge, she also serves as head of applied research at the Neurocivitas Lab and an affiliate lecturer in architecture. And then we'll hear from David Powell, who has spent 30 years developing new hospitals for the NHS, including Central Middlesex and Bristol Southmead, as well as Alderhay in Liverpool, and more recently the new Velindre Cancer Hospital in Cardiff. And he aims to deliver the functional elements of new hospitals whilst providing uplifting environments for patients, relatives, and staff, and avoiding, in his words, the soul crushers that can result from a purely technical focus. And then we'll hear from Jane Findlay, a landscape architect and former president of the Landscape Institute and founding director of FIRA. She's a trustee of the Oxford-based charity Earth Trust, and Oxfordshire-based charity Earth Trust. And in 40 years of master planning and landscape design, Jane's led some of the UK's largest projects, with recognition of her work in healing landscapes in the healthcare sector and championing the role of landscape in shaping resilient, human-centered environments for psychological and physical health. And then, last but not least, Claire Bowman is an architect, academic and sustainability advisor, and her research includes the biophilic classroom, the benefits of nature in learning environments, and a plant guide for schools. And her calculations for improving air quality won her an RHS Chelsea Gold Medal. So just a quick reminder of the format. We're going to have 5 minutes from each speaker to tell us about their work. And then we're going to go straight to the floor for questions for about half an hour. And then we'll have drinks and nibbles at the end. So over to you, Cleo.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. It's actually my first time back in Oxford in a while. I actually did the Masters with Matthew, so it's a privilege to be back. But I have 5 minutes, so I'm going to crack on. My work explores how the built environment impacts biological stress regulation and what this really means for how we design the built environment more generally. So when we think of healthy architecture, we often imagine daylight, air quality, access to green space. But what if the form of a building, its curvature, its proportions, or its patterns also alter how our brains and our immune systems function? And what if it can actually create stress in the body? So chronic stress is now widely understood to be a primary driver of much of contemporary illness. So from cardiovascular disease and inflammation to anxiety, depression, and cognitive decline. And it turns out stress doesn't just come from work or finances or interpersonal relationships. In our current research, we study something called high contrast regular repetitive patterns, and I've yet to come up with a cute acronym for that. So if anyone comes up with it, it's really hard to say. So think of stripes and grids. And these patterns have actually been found to overstimulate the visual cortex. So it forces our visual cortex to work harder and consume more oxygen. And the result is actually visual stress. So it results in slower reading rates, but also in certain individuals, it can actually elicit headaches, migraines, and seizures. So why does this happen? So the reason may actually lie in how the brain evolved. So the human visual system evolved to process statistical patterns found in nature, described by something called a 1/f Fourier amplitude spectrum, where large-scale features and fine details occur in a predictable balance that actually enables efficient encoding by our cortical neurons. So forests, clouds, coastlines, although you can see they're very diverse in their content, they actually share a statistical structure. And this allows our brains to process them efficiently and with little metabolic cost. But many contemporary designs, like the ones I just showed you before, actually depart from these natural statistics quite significantly. So in our work, we combine computational modeling of the visual cortex, the use of neuroimaging and biosensors, and also self-report metrics to actually quantify how the built environment either deviates or aligns with these natural statistics. So to date, our work has examined features like architectural facades, interior features in domestic violence refuges, where residents often have heightened sensory sensitivity due to post-traumatic stress disorder. We're actually now examining the inpatient psychiatric facilities in the Harvard hospital system. And more recently, we completed a 500-year historical analysis of Seoul's architectural development. So in every instance, what we've found is that modern construction techniques, such as modular systems, curtain walls, and digital fabrication, tend to produce environments that rely on rigid grids, strict repetition, and high contrast surfaces, which actually correlate with rising levels of predicted visual stress. And the impact of these scenes on the brain's visual system is magnified by the sheer volume of time that we spend in and around the built environment. So taken together, these findings really reveal that the built environment can either burden or support our biological functioning, and that design fundamentally is a public health variable. And as this evidence grows and the field of neuroarchitecture really develops, it really shows that architecture can influence neural and physiological regulation quite significantly, and the ethical duty of the built environment professionals really becomes increasingly clear. So this means designing environments that support rather than disrupt the nervous system. And I would argue that how we do this now sits very much at the heart of architectural ethics in our profession generally. So designing with nature, for me, means that adding greenery and incorporating biomorphic design into the built environment is key. But aligning our buildings with the biological patterns that our brains and our bodies are built to process is very much at the heart of all of this. So thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. I was going to say, I'm a bit lanky, so need a bit of help there. Sorry if I will bring it down for you, Jay. But I was going to start by saying just two things to start. Not saying a bit random, but my dad was a cabinet maker, and he was really good at. I remember as a kid, when going to the sawmills, he was really good at making things. And I'm terrible. I can't make things. I've got two left hands, and I'm useless at it. And so but I've always wanted to. So there's a bit of in terms of doing this is my equivalent of that. And the other little thing, just to introduce a little bit about where I'm coming from is that when I first did my first job, which is going back a long time now, as I'm getting on a bit now, but the architect took me to it was in central Middlesex, and she showed me. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Yeah. So, and she took me and she showed me the toilet. She said, "This is the toilet in our new building," and it was fantastic. It was in the middle of Brent, which is a really poor part of London. And so this is the most fantastic environment. And so it's been open this now for a couple of years and it's not been touched. It's absolutely in mint condition, which it was. And hospital toilets are terrible. I mean, if anyone's used them, they're really awful things. So it just stuck in my mind that it's these kind of things that it's not necessarily about all the big things. It's about some of these very small things that make a difference. Today, I'm just going to talk about Alder Hey. It's one of the schemes that I'm still working on actually, but just talk about the Children's Hospital in Liverpool, just as a case study. And I'll just give you a quick feel for it. So I joined that in 2011. And when I went there, there was a children's design group, which was on the thing, and that was the squad, and they were really, really empowered. The chief exec's kid was in the group. And they were very, very keen on what they wanted. And what they wanted was a lot of, I'll come on to it in a minute, but they were very strong what they wanted. And if you didn't do it, they were all over you like a cheap suit. They were really, really keen on what they wanted. So you couldn't fly in the face of them. And in terms of the opportunity, what they talked about, they were asked to design what they wanted for the new hospital. And they drew it mostly. And it was 95% was all outside. It wasn't inside. They didn't draw the hospital. They drew the park. They drew the pictures of the outside. It was really interesting, actually. It was just intuitive. They didn't ask to do. That's what they did. And so we then developed Alder Hey in the Park for a competition, which was a main hospital, and it was done on that basis. So we tried to make sure that we brought all these principles into the hospital, and we'd really pushed it. So it's got green roofs and it's got 8 gardens. We really tried very hard, and on the inside as well. Coming back to my I like timber, but we've got quite a lot of timber in the building, which is not that easy to do these days, actually, with Grenfell, etc. But we brought it in, and also in terms of the spaces, this is the intensive care unit, which are traditionally very difficult units, and you're very stressed in there. I'm interested to talk about stress, but you go into an intensive care unit, and they really stress the environment. It's very noisy. Things go ping, and there's no light in them normally. And we made a real effort here to try and get the light in. The only thing we didn't do is coordinate all the machines. So that's my next project, is to make them harmonised. And then we built an institute along the hospital. So we built a research building as well, which we pursued the same thing, different architects, but same principle. And we put some water on here. There's a real tussle about whether you can have water on a hospital scheme. That's for another day, I think. But and then we built the Alder Centre, which is run by bereaved parents, which they run for other bereaved parents to support them. And we did something for them very special. And then we built a mental health hospital, which was done again by another architect with the same principles, all these building in the campus with the same idea. And the idea was to create this campus, which we were committed to, which had all the, everything we wanted in terms of hospital in the campus, but arranged all the buildings in a way that meant that they could experience the outside. And we built a park around it. So I think all my colleagues I work with, I think I'm the only one that's built a park. There aren't many parks getting built these days, but we have built a park at Alder Hey, which surrounds the hospital. And we're very poor at research, by the way, in hospitals. We always do these things and then move on, do the next thing. But we did a little bit of sort of, this is not pure research, but just we've done a little bit of post-project evaluation. And the graph on the left is the make sure it's on the left. It's on the left. Is the staff satisfaction? So we rate in England how people like what they feel about, whether they recommend it as a place to work, and you can see from the graph that it was bubbling around the sort of 50s to 60s, which is typical in hospitals, and it's now right at the top. Now you can't say that's definitely because of the hospital, because there's all kind of factors, but I like to believe that that's a major contributory factor to it. And the volunteers is really interesting, because I work a week in Alder Hey and I do 3 weeks in Cardiff. And when I go up to Alder Hey, the first thing you notice when you go in is all these volunteers, which are trying to help people go around. They're accommodating people, and there was 5 of them when we started, and there's now 400 of them. So they get these spin-offs. Anyway, that was my quick sort of case study of Alder Hey, but I have to take questions later. Thanks.
I'm going to have to readjust this because I'm a bit short. Oh, thank you very much. Oops, I go the right way.
Oh, it's because it's me.
You're next.
Right.
You're next, not me.
We were working in where we were sitting, okay. Okay, and I'm the same height as you, so maybe a little bit. Hi everybody. So I'm Claire, not Jane. So I'm Claire Bowman. Thank you. Thanks. Lovely. That's great. So since 2017, we've been focused on implementing nature-based solutions in schools. That came at a backdrop of I'm a sustainability advisor and I just felt no one was listening anymore and I needed to make a difference. I wanted to make a difference. So I actually turned to nature to help because nobody really minded me putting a plant in a school. It wasn't controversial. So that's how our study began. So we began with a year-long study at Putney High School where we carried out research into the restorative benefits of nature-based solutions. And this was at a backdrop of the potential of introducing mechanical ventilation, which is what we were trying to avoid. But we actually chose the 15 patterns of biophilic design to be inspired by Terrapin Bright and Green. And our research there focused on nature in space, which is using plants, natural analogue, which was a mural in a classroom of a woodland, and prospect, the importance of views to nature when you're learning and teaching. We also adapted the flourish wheel for wellbeing, which was very commonly used in workplace. And Professor Derek Clements-Croom and the other author Marilis Ramos kindly gave us their research to help us adapt it for schools. And this approach is the equivalent of looking out of the window here. When we're in nature, when we're walking in nature, our alpha brain waves are stimulated, and this really helps stimulate and allow an imagination to thrive. And that was our vision for children. Our research was also grounded in NASA's original plant-based air quality calculations, which we adapted to consider the volumes in schools, which are much higher. And then the rooms we chose, it was actually sixth form students that chose the maths classroom because it was the most stressful classroom in the entire school. And then right next door, there was an English classroom. So that became our mural room. So we put plants in maths and a mural in English. We found plants consistently improved air quality within a month of our study. And we saw a 10% improvement in air quality and 7% improvement in creating fresher environments. So that's the thing that helps us bounce back in a classroom. It's the thing that really gets you going. And that started straight away. And then what we did over the winter and in the spring is we kept improving that data. But the biggest change we saw was the 15 metres deep of mature trees outside the classroom between the school and a very busy, polluted road. Putney Hill was notorious for its air quality at the time. And we discovered throughout that year a 23% improvement in temperature, air quality and humidity. But also what came was birdsong and the occasional squirrel running around. And it was that difference, that was a life-saving change that the school saw because we knew this school was safe. We knew the air quality was safe in the school, but it took a year to prove that. So we also found that plants consistently, sorry, I'm repeating myself, sorry. Today, we advocate nature-based campus-wide approach that integrates the urban greening factor. So this was introduced in London. It's a very simple calculation on any new projects that you need to look at the site and improve it using nature. But we apply it to existing schools. And that means with a set ethos of access and views to nature, improved air quality, reducing heat island effects using nature. But what comes with it is enhanced biodiversity. What we've been doing with existing schools in London now is opening them up year round to the wider community and also introducing outdoor learning. So what we do is work with existing schools with not a lot of budget. And what we've also started to develop based on some of what Cleo's been saying is actually a SEND biophilic design code for schools. And this is the really simple changes we can make to schools that don't cost a lot of money, but actually make them a lot more exclusive, a lot more inclusive to everybody. And our research has shown that subtle nature-based solutions can make a difference.
Sorry about that, Claire. It's my turn now. I'm Jane. I'm a landscape architect. And so does designing and building with nature improve our health and well-being? Well, as a landscape architect, you won't be surprised to hear that my answer is an unequivocal yes. And the evidence for this is mounting. But to truly understand why, we must recognise the profound relationship between the health of people, the health of place, and the health of the planet. Human health cannot be separated from ecological health, and designing with nature rather than against it isn't a luxury, it's a public health necessity. And the science is clear. We've heard already this evening, people live close to green spaces, live longer, and healthier lives. A global study published in the Lancet Planetary Health in 2019 found that individuals with access to nearby nature experienced reduced chronic disease and premature mortality. Nature also improves mental health, lowering stress hormones, reducing anxiety and depression, and improving mood. And the NHS even prescribes time in nature as part of its preventative healthcare. And it's not just about individuals, it's nature-rich, walkable neighbourhoods strengthen social connections, reduce loneliness, help people feel safer and more at homes in their communities. And Public Health England found that for every £1 that's invested in green infrastructure delivers £4 of health benefits through its lower NHS costs and greater productivity. So the evidence is pretty overwhelming. But it isn't new, it's been done before. And of course, the Victorians recognised the connection between public health and access to nature. And some of our greatest town parks were designed and installed as a direct response to the squalid, overcrowded conditions of industrial cities. And later, of course, the garden movement took that vision even further, weaving homes, workplaces and green spaces into more balanced, healthier communities. So designing with nature to support health has deep roots in our planning tradition. It's what's changed today is the scale of the challenge and our understanding of how green infrastructure supports not only health, but climate resilience and biodiversity. And that's why we need clear, measurable standards for access to nature. The urban forest researcher Cecil Koneidik proposed the 300 rule. You see 3 trees from your house, you live in a neighbourhood with 30% tree canopy cover and live within 30 metres of a green space. It's simple, it's memorable and profoundly democratic, and a modern expression of the same values that shaped those Victorian parks. So landscape architects design systems that connect ecology, health and place, shaping environments that work with natural processes and harness ecosystem services nature provides to support human health and well-being. So think of hospital gardens that help patients recover faster and need less medication, or the forest schools where young people are educated outdoors in nature, or urban green projects that cool cities, clean air, manage stormwater, invite people to walk and play, or community-led landscapes that restore local ecosystems at the same time rebuilding agency, pride and connection. Designing with nature isn't about decoration, it's about creating connected living systems that deliver multiple benefits all at once. That's clean air, cooler cities, stronger communities and healthier people. And at the Landscape Institute, we call this the landscape-led approach, and it recognises that climate biodiversity and health crises are inseparable and must be tackled at the same time. And being landscape-led means putting natural systems like soil, water, vegetation and people right at the heart of everything that we do. So seeing cities as ecosystems rather than grey infrastructure, and embedding the ideas like this 330-300 rule into every everyday practice that we do. So yes, designing with building with nature, building with nature profoundly improves our health and well-being, but we must go beyond it being a backdrop. It must become the foundation for design, planning and for policy. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Well, thank you all for sticking to your 5 minutes. Amazing. I don't know if I've been to one of these where that's happened before, so great. So let's go straight to questions from the floor, if anyone has got any. Yeah, in front here. We have a roving mic coming to you, and there's a mic on the table there.
Thank you. I'm particularly interested in the work you've been doing in schools. That's sort of my background in supporting and advising and inspecting schools. Do you have any data on improved outcomes for children, academic achievement or behavioural issues as a result of the work that you've done?
First, I might start with thank you for asking the question, and I think I might have forgotten to show my slide.
I think you did.
So if I put that up,
yeah.
So we haven't got exact results. However, what we've been working for and the feedback we get, one of the biggest changes has been attendance. And post-COVID, at the moment, we've been working on the first hybrid school in London, which is children that simply aren't going to school anymore. And working with Susie Longstaff, that did all of this research with me. She's leading the hybrid culture in London. And what we've been doing is a journey in, and that has had really good results this summer. These are students that wouldn't have taken exams, and not just taken exams, they're actually going on to college and they're going back to college. So what we have seen is, I think, a bouncing back of pupils, particularly post-COVID. And a lot of the work we do is really low budget, but what we see the children responding to it. So, but I'm sorry, we don't have exam results, but we are getting good attendance results.
Fantastic. Well done.
Could I just add something to that? There's work that's been done by a charity called Learning Through Landscapes, and they have quantified some of the outcomes from forest schools and the Learning Through Landscape programme that has been built into new schools. And they found, I think it was something like a 56% improvement in pupil concentration, levels of bullying dropped, and various other things. So there's a lot of not just academic improvements, but a lot of social and behavioural improvements as well.
Great. Another question over there.
Thank you, everybody. So this is for Professor Valentine. So in 2006, Sao Paulo, Brazil banned outdoor advertisement, and they replaced it with art, and it made architecture, more visible. There was more space for trees and whatnot. I'd just be curious as to your thoughts on initiatives like this, and if there's any research around like the neurological, psychological effects.
That's a great question. First of all, Professor, that's very generous. I'm actually submitting my PhD next week. So that feels unearned, but thank you. So in terms of that, it's a really interesting question. The first study that I actually ever did in this field was on the impacts of biophilic. I don't know why I didn't include it. Now I'm thinking about it. That didn't make any sense at all. The impacts of biophilic design on neuroinflammatory levels, and basically how visual exposure to specific biophilic forms reduce the amount of inflammation that we could register in the brain. So in all of these instances, what we're seeing is this profound mediation of visual complexity and visual stress. So in instances like that, I mean, it was interesting with the PTSD study, because one of the primary things that came out of our computational program and our analysis of the built environment was actually visual clutter. So visual clutter in specific instances was hugely stressful from a visual processing perspective. The interesting thing is that there's a tremendous amount of variation in visual complexity in nature. It's just organized in a very specific way. So when we're talking about initiatives like this, I actually think it's profoundly impactful. The question is, what happens when you remove? I mean, I would assume that the visual stimuli that we have currently is negatively influencing, sorry, we're going back and forth, it's negatively influencing people's physiological response. But the question is, what do we replace it with? Because one of the things that came out of our soul study, which we're really hoping to replicate, was actually, the study will come out, if all goes well with peer review, in the next week or two, but we actually presented the findings at the Seoul Architecture Biennale, where they're talking very explicitly about the emotional city and the impacts of rapid urbanization on human health, communities, and whatnot. So the question is, what happens when you remove visual complexity? Because that can also be hugely problematic. So a lot of the visual stressors that we're seeing actually come from the lack of any visual complexity, but then visual complexity that's enacted in the wrong way is also problematic. So presumably the biomorphic and the biophilic interventions hit that sweet spot. So that was a very wordy answer to your question. I think I'm still on the 5 minutes thing, so I'm like on double speed. But does that answer your question? Yeah, stunning.
We do have a good example of that with children. We worked in a primary school. Putney High School has Putney Junior School, and we worked with the early years teachers, and we took everything out of the classrooms and just talked about purpose and actually having clear spaces, but we overlaid it with the Fibonacci sequence of proportions, and we didn't spend a lot of money. We didn't have the money, but what we did was we replaced everything, and we added a curve green area, very tactile. And what happened, but also we kept it plain. All the walls were white to begin with and very acoustically comfortable. What happened was there was a tree outside and the light shone through the tree and created a pattern. And what we discovered, that was enough. Just the tree light. And then we discovered that the children were independent within 4 days in that classroom. They understood the purpose. It was very natural. And that we still haven't published that research, but it was a lovely moment to see 4-year-olds developing with nature and in a simple, very low cognitive space.
Grant. Matthew, I think you had your hand up last round.
Thanks to the 4 speakers who, I think, without exception, talked about nature in terms of plants. And I want to ask about animals, and if I can give a personal anecdote. In 2007, I was rushed into hospital with pneumonia, spent a night in intensive care, and it was an older hospital. They had the window open, and I could hear a blackbird singing, and I've always credited the blackbird with my rapid and complete recovery. And so I wonder, is there evidence for wider nature, animals? We all know how your cat displays itself so artfully around the house if you're lucky enough to have one. So over to you.
I'm not sure this is evidence in the true sense of evidence, but we sort of subscribe to it, so people sort of understand the point, I think. And when I went to do Alder Hey, there was this artificial birdsong thing that when you went through something, the birdsong went off. And I think people thought it was a good idea at the time, but I think it got very irritating when people kept going past this thing and it kept going off, and it wasn't very natural. But it sort of moved on from that. So when we did the hospital, we made sure the windows opened. So we can maybe talk a bit more about the balance between, we're trying to get very, very ambitious energy targets. And sometimes to get ambitious energy targets, sometimes it fights against natural ventilation. There's quite a debate going on about it. But we've made a purposeful thing. We wanted to open the window so you could hear what was outside. And if we come back to that consultation, the children drew animals as well as plants when they did it. And we've taken it out a little bit further. So we've now got these dogs going to Alder Hey. So this is the stress dogs. And so the children, they go around and the children can use them. So they go into wards and you can go and pet the dog. But we've now let it out to staff because we realised the staff are getting distressed as well. So the dog now goes into some of the departments. The dog turns up and you can spend a bit of time with the dog as well. So that's in real action.
Yeah, I do a lot of work in healthcare and particularly palliative care, end-of-life care. And we always design spaces for beds to be pushed outside so you can actually feel and hear, using all your senses, not just sight. And there was always reports back about trying to attract birds close to the wards or to the places where the beds are outside, because birdsong makes you feel more hopeful. And I think that's really important. And you're right in what you're saying. But if you take it a stage further, without birds, without insects, without animals, we wouldn't have food. It's end of. We need insects to pollinate our crops. We need insects in our towns and cities as well, not just in the countryside, because actually a lot of the countryside is quite a monoculture and very devoid of bird and insect life. And in fact, it's domestic gardens in the UK support millions, tens of millions of birds. And the Americans actually looked at the work that the RSPB do around attracting garden birds, and they've been trying to replicate it in some parts of the States, because your own domestic garden is an important wildlife haven.
Grand. I think you had your hand up.
Thank you so much. Those were fantastic talks and very inspiring. I'm particularly interested in green spaces and nature in hospitals and healthcare settings. Many of you are too. And I've been doing lots of public engagement actually over the past month, and I've found it's really interesting. There are diverse audiences in the general public who are engaged with this, who support this broadly. But we so often see these barriers. Some of them are kind of very arbitrary, doors being locked, streamers, worries about unintended consequences, concerns about who owns what land. And I just wondered how you feel we can overcome some of those barriers in a tangible way, and how we can get that kind of cultural shift away from those concerns. Thank you.
I've got quite a few things to say on this, but I don't know else there's got. Yeah. Well, I was just going to say the barriers are. It's amazing what gets in the way of doing it, and you mentioned some of them. And one of the big ones actually is when you design hospitals, there's always a fight for the ground floor. And I don't know if people are familiar with this, but when you design a new hospital, there's always a sort of you put together, an adjacency matrix or whatever people call it, and you have to make sure you get your departments together. And a lot of people want to be on the ground floor for convenience or for actually want to get out into the landscape, and there's usually not enough. And so there's a bit of a fight for the space, and there'll be a number of people who will try and take the gardens away because they want to try and get on the ground floor, etc. So it is quite a big barrier, and overcoming that can be difficult. I think the other thing is, as you say, there's some people got some antibodies to some of the. We were talking about bugs, but we had antibodies to things that are like that. The infection control people. And we had quite a fight on the cancer hospital about the infection control element of it as well. So that's been quite difficult. And I think that I mentioned earlier, but I think one of the things that we're a bit short of actually is the application of the research into the hospitals. And so we were starting up about a little chat with Wilf about it, but because we always take it for granted it's a good thing. But when you try and do it, there isn't very much research on it actually specifically in hospitals. It's very limited in terms of actually saying in hospitals, if you could put green spaces in, what's the impact of it? And I think there's a real gap for it. And we were arguing, there's a few of us arguing for this, and it's not quite come to pass, but I think with this new hospital programme that's just been developed at the moment, it felt like there should be a research programme that goes alongside it, and that research programme should develop some of this information into a much more formal fashion and put it in place so that people can then use it. And if it's possible, we're missing some stuff that's around at the moment. We could collate it and maybe sort of try and get it together in one place so people see it, but it feels like a missing element. So when you try and go to it, you can't prove it. So that would be my suggestion.
Thank you. I don't know how many hospitals I've built over the years. I can actually work my way around the country with all the hospitals that we've done. It's a problem. It is a problem, and we spend a lot of time and effort designing hospitals. We bid for them in the first instance with design teams, and we're all up against each other in competition, and the landscape figures very highly, and the spaces around the hospital are really important. And then it gets watered down often. Money runs out. the operational requirements of the hospital take precedence, and doors to gardens and courtyards get locked and people can't go in there and use them because there's fear around, as you say, bugs and so on, and health and safety. It is an issue, but we find that some of those barriers are being broken down now. It's a lot of siloed thinking, where you have your facilities management team who are not part of the original design team, and if we can work with them, we can understand what their issues are, and we can design out a lot of the problems if we know what they are to start off with. Interestingly, we've been working with Macmillan Cancer Care for over 20 years now, developing cancer care treatment centres, and they don't have that infection control issue. It's not a problem for them, and we have places where we again push people out who are in the middle of chemotherapy. They might sit outside and have treatment. They're often photosensitive as a result of the treatment, so we provide the shade for them and all that sort of thing. But they are a well-informed client. And going back to your point on research, it's not much has been done since Professor Roger Ulrich of the 1980s, 90s did his work. And that is probably the starting point of my interest in healing landscapes.
I was just saying, I volunteer. Well, I volunteer, yeah. That's it.
Right, okay.
I just wanted to add, we had one situation at Addenbrooke's where there was no landscape, no space for landscape, and we actually entered the competition. It was a design competition for a healing building without a landscape. So I actually made the building the landscape, and we were inspired by the geometries of a shell, and we were inspired by the geometries through the work of Barbara Hepworth and how she described healing. And everybody bought into it. On that moment, everybody around the table, the estates team, all liked the idea of using nature and geometry and healing and light. And then the contractor believed in it. And because that followed all the way through, everybody that worked on it, when it opened, it was really nice because people said, I feel better, or I feel this building. And we learned that it's now a teaching building and it's really successful. But it was also one of the first places that the COVID jab was given to the elderly because it was a calming building. So sometimes when we have that obstacle that there's no landscape, you can make a building using geometry with light. The other place you may find some really good evidence is the Maggie's Centre, because I saw a wonderful lecture where it's the journey of receiving that difficult news and the journey to the door where you will go. There is a garden in between, and that garden is really important. So I think they may have some evidence to support the need for the gardens in between the difficult rooms. So.
Besides the fact that I volunteer to do more research on it, I can talk a little bit about some of the barriers to research in the field generally, because I do think that one of the things that research allows us to do is it allows us to kind of arm ourselves, as it were, to make some compelling arguments about often what is sort of innately known already. I mean, very often we feel the benefits, we understand it, but to be able to quantify the benefits and also physically quantify it is hugely beneficial. There's been kind of significant shifts in the last however many years, 5 years, I'd say, within the field of neuroarchitecture more generally. And a lot of it's actually come down to technological developments. So the ability to do things. One of the big questions that we always have is how do you actually assess the impact of these spaces in a really controlled way? So we've got lots of issues in terms of kind of ecological validity, but increasingly the ability to use clinical biosensors. Like we use something called functional near-infrared spectroscopy. And the best way I could just define it is if an EEG cap that measures electricity and an fMRI had a baby. So it's a cap that basically shines infrared light into the brain and it bounces off the oxygen and we collect it on the surface and it shows how hard specific parts of your brain are working in order to process what it's seeing. That was unheard of a couple of years ago. They were hugely expensive. So the ability to actually deploy these research techniques at scale, and also this program that I mentioned, it's called VISTA, the Visual Stress Analysis Tool, that we actually apply to healthcare settings often to try and identify visually stressful or visually toxic environments and also to show how we can remedy it with biomorphic and biophilic intervention. So from a research perspective, we're making kind of huge leaps and bounds in terms of how we can try and quantify the impacts. But it's a field that's kind of nascent in and of itself. It's very much growing. There's lots of limitations. But fundamentally, I do think that, or at least I'm very biased, but I'm very much hoping that it's something that can kind of add value and try and highlight the benefits that, you guys all innately know are hugely impactful. And I volunteer. That's it again.
I'll just say controversial. Just the one thing I'd say, PFI, which has got a really bad name and it has some downsides to it. The one thing that I would say about it is that if you go to some of the schemes I've done where they're under the PFI, the gardens are mint because there's a penalty. There's a penalty mechanism on it. So if they don't maintain the garden, they get penalised. And if you compare, I've just been doing a bit of retro work at Alder Hay, but the stuff we've done has got a lot of weeds in it, and the PFI hasn't. So there's something about incentives as well as research.
Grand, thanks. Right at the back there in the purple jumper.
Hello, and thanks for the amazing talk. I'm quite excited about the rule that Jane kindly mentioned, the 330-300. So I'm actually trying to do research and test it if this rule make a difference to mental health. But then I'm sort of here to throw a so what question situation here. So there were people ask me this question is like, given the reality, for instance, how Oxford looks like, and saying like, I think in original when the Cecil Konyndyk, that when he published this rule and he did a case study in Barcelona and it was only 4.7 residents live in the area that meet this rule, like 3 trees around your neighborhood, 30% canopy and a 300-meter access to green space. So for instance, in the case of Oxford, and saying like we potentially say let's have 15% residents have this, like live in the area, meet this rule. But Oxford is quite developed, and in the tree equity score is very green city already. There's not much kind of existing vacant spaces or landscape there to dancing on. Just what potentially the evidence we can sell. Like for instance, I assessed this how many residents meet this rule, and then what else? Is that we have to kind of actively selling this or pushing that we're gonna do large scale tree planting. But there's not enough spaces around the corner to do that. So what potentially, where does the potential direction about this rule gonna go? And also, it's not as simple as that, obviously, but also what type of tree probably also matters. Well, thank you.
Ooh, can I just say something? As a visitor to Oxford today, and what I've experienced walking from the station, I found lots of opportunities for change, like what we're seeing in London. Particularly Woodstock Road is a highway. That is a highway of opportunity for change. It's a big cultural change, and you've seen it starting to happen in Oxford. It is green, but it's actually quite hard to navigate on foot, particularly if you were elderly. And in other countries like Japan, you see benches and spaces to sit and spaces to experience nature. Oxford would really benefit from an analysis to look at the opportunities, and you call it that, opportunities, because it does need to still continue to change and improve and introduce more and more public-orientated spaces. I have no idea how you cross this road. Some of these roads around here, as a newcomer to Oxford, I've been really surprised. So I think there is an opportunity for change here.
Right, so the 330-300 rule is quite a simplistic thing, but it sticks. And that's what counts when you're talking to people right across from politicians to residents. It's a good tool to start with. Now, I think we have to get away from thinking about retrospectively just popping in a few trees here and there. We need to be considering green infrastructure as proper infrastructure in the same way that you put in sewers, roads, you bring energy into a city. And if we're going to make our cities livable as we become warmer and the climate changes and we end up with wetter weather and more prolonged rain, we're going to end up with more flooding. We have to cope with that. We need green infrastructure that doesn't just look pretty and just helps us make us feel better. We need green infrastructure that's actually physically going to do some engineering for us as well. So it's going to clean the air. It's going to, you've got sustainable urban drainage. And one of the pictures on my slides was of the Grey to Green project in Sheffield, where they literally took a dual carriageway ring road around the city centre. They took it up, half of it up, reduced the amount of traffic that went through the city, and they created a green linear park which improved pedestrian connectivity, reduced pollution. It dealt with the surface water runoff. It was an area that used to flood because the River Don would come up and over that area, and improve the value of properties around that area. So it does lots of things. So I think we have to get away from thinking that it's a nice to have. We need to start retrofitting our cities, because we don't build new cities, not in the UK. Okay, we're going to have 12 new towns potentially in the coming years, but we've got to go back into the cities and to areas, and particularly that ring around the edge of city centres where you have the poorest living conditions, and you go into those areas and they'll have the lowest tree canopy cover of any part of a city centre. And Birmingham, where I'm based, those areas of Nechells, of Ladywood, all just on the edge of the city, have very poor green space. They call them green deserts because it's close mown grass and that's it, no trees, and there's a lot of poverty and deprivation, and particularly ill health as well. And the City Council now have a tree planting programme. They're going to be introducing trees in all the streets, moving services to accommodate them in it. So it's a big project, and it's not going to happen overnight, but that's how we have to start looking at greening our city centres.
Grand, thanks, Jane. We have probably time for one more question.
I have a quick addition to that, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure.
One of the things that I would say about, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that sometimes when we're talking about biomorphic interventions, it can be a little bit like lipstick on a pig. Yeah. You know, we can actually be dressing up what's fundamentally kind of underwhelming architecture that doesn't support human health, and then we dress it up and hope that that's enough. But a fundamental kind of reimagining of how we employ biophilic and biomorphic design is key. And the second thing is actually, I do think that there's an interesting conversation about both biophilic design, so the direct incorporation of greenery, but also biomorphic design, which is basically designs that take inspiration from the mathematical patterns of nature, which was actually the dissertation that I did with Matthew way back when, because actually at specific spatial frequencies, so when you apply biomorphic principles in specific ways, you can actually elicit very similar responses, which is why a lot of the architecture that you might see embodies biomorphic forms, but it's actually structurally the built environment. Because one of the hesitations that I have with the presentation that I just gave, is that it kind of paints all architecture as bad, and it's not inherently bad. Some architecture can be incredibly harmful, but some can be profoundly healing and actually very much supportive of human health and wellness. But it seems, as the research grows, that the architecture that does fundamentally support human health and wellness really respects these kind of base neurological principles that are really derived from things like constructal law and specific thermodynamic principles that derive and produce the world that we evolved within. So that would be my last addition on that one.
Grand. Great jumper at the back. If you make it very brief, then we can.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess first comment. I love the idea of care dogs. I'd like to advocate for care cats as well in the hospital setting as a personal cat fan. But with the biomimicry concept and sort of the drawing from the natural world and as you mentioned, the hospital built in sort of with inspiration from a shell, are there other sort of more, I guess, in the natural world, and then bouncing also off the comment and question about animals, are there other animals or organisms that you are drawing inspiration for or considering to draw inspiration for future buildings? I'm thinking from almost a communal standpoint, my cohort's probably heard this enough, but bees being kind of a very social colony creatures, as humans being very social creatures ourselves. Are there other similar groups or creatures that you may draw inspiration for or look towards as you develop new ideas?
In a sentence.
I just think that cats hospital cats is a really interesting subject. They're very controversial, hospital cats. So anyway, we can talk about it more another time, but very interesting. My PA is really keen on cats, and we're having a fight trying to keep them on site. But I was just going to say, out of interest, when we ran that, I showed those schemes, the scheme that was the mental health scheme, we actually did the competition, and we said that we wanted to understand, we wanted to base it on something in nature and model it on that and see what comes out of it. We had no idea what was going to come out of it. And the winner was a bee-based idea, where they tried to look at what bees, the idea of the hive and how the hive worked, etc. I won't go into all the detail of it, but they tried to draw a line through that and demonstrate how the architecture was following that pattern. So we had some very interesting ideas as well, just by putting it out there and seeing what people came up with.
And can I just have just a quick say about the importance of those microbes, because the gut biome we're just finding out about. I don't know if it's any work that you've been doing on I don't know, but the relationship between people and green spaces and outdoors and cats and dogs and farm animals. All those microbes, where we all need them, and it's a beginning of some really fascinating research, and I think it's something that is going to influence how we design our public realm in the future.
We haven't done anything on that, but there's actually, I just got an email on my way here from Nature, has a whole feature on the microbe and healthy architecture. That's their new feature of the day. It's a very, very beautiful spread. I have nothing to do with it, but it's very cool, so I would recommend it.
So I've got a couple of animal anecdotes, because birdsong is key to schools, and that was what our battle was about, not closing down the windows in a school, because you need to hear birdsong, need to hear nature. We actually got told to shut the windows because the leaves were too noisy in an acoustic report, and then we fought again to have, and actually we did actuators, and the students said they loved the fact that the windows opened when they felt it should. The teachers hated it, but the students loved the fact that the building was breathing with them. The nicest thing I've had is we did a biophilic sensory space at Putney, and I was just finishing it, and because I install everything myself and plants and do everything, and a squirrel just ran in, had a little run round and went out. And what's nice about Putney, we've spent a lot of time trying not to keep putting the landscape in. And what I keep seeing is the squirrel. Seeing squirrels dancing along a fence outside a classroom is pure delight. Finally, there is a study in America where the children chose to face the window in the biophilic classroom in their exams, but they were wearing monitors and their hearts went up when there was blossom. And because they didn't know what was wrong, they thought all the monitors were wrong, but it turned out there was blossom that day, and the children were just so happy to see blossom. So there's a lot you need to see outside your windows.
Grand. That's an excellent note to end on. I mean, we're around, so if you've got more questions, come and collar us. Yes, so last thing is just to thank all four of our excellent speakers.